Your thoughts on the Dear Colleague letter? You could actually look at this either way. It does bring clarity. We have top-line numbers. Maybe they can get things moving. Maybe there's a minibus to get this together before, or a couple of them, before we start shutting down in January. Or is that message to Joe Biden, I'm not going to play along anymore?
Well, I think it's, sort of classic, put the good news first. So, you read through that letter. We have a deal on the NDAA, the defense bill.
That's
we
right,
have a deal on the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and extending that. And then you sort of get down to the supplemental for Ukraine, and it's like, whoa, hold on here. We don't have a deal on that, and he ties it to the border, as we know that Republicans are very interested in getting a deal done on that. So, without some sort of concessions from the White House on the border or some sort of deal coming together, it's looking very dicey for Ukraine funding, which is going to put Ukraine in a very difficult position heading into January and February.
That's right. Shalonda Young from OMB said there's no magic pot at the end of the year for Ukraine funding if they don't get a supplemental. We also heard from Republican Senator Lindsey Graham today, of course, of South Carolina, speaking to reporters about this funding for Ukraine, Israel, and the southern border.
We had an effort yesterday by Senator Schumer to pass aid to Ukraine, Taiwan, and Israel, which I support, and their proposal on securing a broken border was awful. What's next? Here's what's next. The Commander-in-Chief, Joe Biden, needs to wake up and do something about a broken border.
So, Kate, to Dan's point, they're trying to put this back in the White House's ball. If you want us to pass Israel-Ukraine, which we know Senator Lindsey Graham wants that, they're saying they need to do more on the border. But what's the time frame for any of this?
Well, that's the thing. Congress runs on deadlines. They always need to have that looming over them to make them do something. And I think this is an effort to get a hard deadline set. We'll need Ukraine funding by X date. But it's not a real deadline. It's not like a government shutdown or an end-of-year deadline where if you don't do anything, the government shuts down or something. So I think we're looking at a lot of this stuff spilling into next year potentially, where, the administration is coming in and saying, Ukraine needs that money. Yesterday, Israel needs money for its war against Hamas. But again, there just is not a firm deadline. There is not a date in the sand. So it's hard to get them moving.
Sure. You wonder if the holidays might provide a bit of impetus here, maybe a false deadline of some sort. But the White House is certainly willing to call out Republicans for it. Here's Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre a bit earlier in the White House briefing room.
It's stunning that we have gotten to this point and that Republicans in Congress willing to give Putin a gift, the greatest gift that Putin could hope for. That's what we're seeing. And so they are playing chicken with our national security. That's what we're seeing here. And history will remember them harshly.
Republicans, though, I think in both chambers see this as an opportunity. If there's that great an urgency, let's use it to finally get to a deal on the border. Congressman French Hill, a Republican from Arkansas, told us earlier today on Bloomberg Sound On, he thinks that could happen by the end of the year, aided by the need to leave to get home for the holidays, the desire to. Is that a realistic view?
I think you're right that the holidays do present a deadline. But again, there is not, Republicans see urgency in the border, but there is not a date like,
You're skeptical that happens this year.
Where the border is going to, there's going to be some dramatic change in border policy. But they're obviously still talking. There are some signs of optimism. We'll see what happens into next week. But I think if there is not huge progress next week, then we've got to look to January.
Yeah.
Well, the problem is the White House is trying to get done by the end of the year because they've outlined that it's going to put Ukraine in a really difficult position. President Zelensky was supposed to join a call this week with senators.
Right.
And he backed out. He didn't. I'm not sure what the politics around that was. I know he did speak to the president. But do you expect more outreach from Ukraine directly to lawmakers?
I think you'll definitely see that. I mean, that's been happening all through this, even prior to the invasion. What I was told by a source was that Zelensky's advisors basically said, look, this is a domestic fight between Republicans and Democrats on the border. Immigration is one of the toughest issues that Congress will ever debate, or certainly has over the last 20 years proven to be a very tough issue. And I think the advice that President Zelensky got was just stay out of that for now, stay above that fray. Let the Republicans and Democrats try to sort that out, but certainly work the phones in the interim. And I think if the Senate were sort of left to its own devices, there could be a deal. We see some talks happening there. But then it's a question of what happens with the House. And there you have a much more difficult calculus because, as we know, people have lost their jobs over things like this. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see how it all plays out.
The two lead negotiators on the border issue in the Senate seem to be talking past each other. Chris Murphy, the Democrat, says Republicans are making unreasonable demands that can't pass the Senate. James Lankford, the Republican, says Democratic counterproposals will do nothing to lower illegal border crossings. It doesn't sound like we're on the verge of a deal here. Kate, been working on this for 20 years. So
20 years, but it'll be solved just before
maybe the
Christmas.
next two legislative sessions will figure that out. Not likely. The fact of the matter is, though, it will have to hinge on the border. Does that part change?
Well, that's what
the White House wants to change that.
The Republicans that's what they're standing firm on. Do they change? Do they relent? That's the question.
The Republicans, is there any place where the rubber meets the road at all? For the southern border, for asylum, for parole.
Where there's common ground.
Where there's common ground. Because also this White House is under a ton of pressure. Governor Pritzker, Eric Adams, Governor Kathy Hochul, these Democratic-led states and cities are also making their own pleas to the White House that more needs to be done.
Right. The pressure is on. You're right. The pressure is on about the border. But I think, again, to get it done in December seems hard to see. But
it seems like Democrats might be willing to go